So good morning. So this is the first live streaming for our Focus International BD. And this morning we have Moise Kissous, publisher, the head of the association of French publisher for comics, for bande dessine, and the publisher Steinkis group. So this morning, Moise kindly will present us the market, the French market, and give you some ideas of what are the players in this market. And then if you have questions, we can have a discussion about this. Romain will show you some information, unfortunately in French, but you will get later this information in English. So if there is, it's mostly charts. So obviously it's easy to understand, but if you have questions, you can ask questions, and you can ask questions through the chat, and we'll try to answer. So now I will give the mic to Moise, and then after I will say 20-25 minutes, we can have discussion about the French market for comics books. So Moise, this is you. We don't have your mic, Moise.
Yes, no, it should be working now, is it?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, so I was saying thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be with you today and to introduce to you some information, some key information about the French comics market. So I'm currently, I'm happy to be the responsible of the Union of French Publishers of Comic Books within the Syndicat National de dition. And I also have my own independent publishing group, which name is Steinkis Group, and which gathers several imprints in different areas of comics. So let's talk about the French market, and I hope you will learn something about it. So what we can say about the French comics market, first, it's one of the main growing segments in the area of publishing books in France. Today, the comics market is equivalent to 15% of the French publishing market if you put aside the school books and the professional books. So which means that today comic books is the third important player in the publishing area in France, just after literature and after children books. So these are the three. If you put the three together, you have already 50% of the market: literature, children books, and comic books. All in all, it is 50% of the French publishing market. Who is buying comics in France? Well, you might be surprised, but 50% of the buyers are more than 40 years. They are more than 40 years old. 52% of the buyers are women. 53% of the books are bought by people who have children. And 54% are bought by people who live in urban areas. And again, 54%, this is an important data, is bought by people who are in the highest part of the revenues in France. 52% of the comics are bought for other people to offer them. 60% of the books are offered to readers which are less than 30 years old. And what is interesting also about people who buy comics is that in the past, probably people would think comics is mainly for children or mainly for people who don't read much more than comics. It is absolutely not true. As we just see, readers are older. And also, people who buy comics are among the ones who buy more books in general. People who buy comics, they buy in general 18 books per year, among which 6 comics, which means that when you buy comics, you buy also other books. And this is something very important we were happy to share with the bookshops, to tell them, you see, when you put comics in the right position in your bookshop, you will drive in your bookshop people who buy much more than only comics. And it's true that in the recent years, general bookshops have been developing more and more the part which is dedicated to the comics bookshop, to the comics books. And we also enjoy a lot of specialized bookshops, specialized comic book bookshop, which have been under a very strong dynamic in the last 10 years. We have almost more than 150 bookshops in France, all around the territory, all around the country, which are dedicated only to comics. If we look into the details of which kind of comics, because as you know, in France, we have large diversity of offer. So we go a bit further on the document with the help of Romain. Il faut descendre un peu. Voilà, merci beaucoup. So on this part, when we look at what is strong in the market, so we can see different. Il faut remonter un tout petit peu parce que là on voit pas le haut de la. Voilà, encore un peu. Merci beaucoup. So if you look at the figures here, you can see the different kind of comics. So you have the American comics, which represent 6% of the volumes of sales. You have the manga, the Japanese manga, which represent 38% of the market, so a very strong part of the French market. And in between, you have what we call French-Belgium comics, which truly today represents a very strong diversity of offers, not only French or Belgian artists, but whatever is not American comics or Japanese manga is put into this category. And we have divided this into 3 categories. Children comics, which represents 17% of the activity. Patrimonial comics, which what we call patrimonial comics are comics which have been existing for more than 35 years. You will find into this comics such as Astérix, Tintin, Lucky Luke, all the strong series which have made the happiness of a lot of readers. And then you have the other comics, which we call genre adult comics, which includes adventure, history comics, science fiction, whatever is not for children or is not a patrimonial comics. And this part is 28% of the market. If you look at where has been the highest growth on our market in the last years, and this is on the last 2 years, but in general, you can have in mind that it's true for the last 10 years, the biggest strength has come from both the manga and the children comics. These are the 2 drivers today for the market. Children comics, recently published, we would say, and manga. Let's go further into the main driver for the market. So if we look into the children comics, the modern children comics, most of them are bought by women, by the parents of the children. 40% are read by children who are 10 to 14 years old, and 27% by children who are less than 10 years old. 48% of the children comics which are bought are read by young girls, which is very good news, because 10, 15 years ago, people would say that children comics will be more read by boys, and it's not true anymore, and it's very good news. 50% of the people who have bought comics, children comics, have also bought children novels. And this is important also because sometimes in the past, less and less know, people would say, young children, when they read comics, they read only comics, it's not good for listening, for learning, reading, etc., which is completely false. In truth, all the children that read, a good amount of children who read comics also read a lot of other books. and this is important. I would like also to stress here that within our syndicate this year, we have organized an important action towards the schools to demonstrate how comic books for children can be helpful for learning a lot of things, learning to read certainly, but also learning a lot of things, even when the comic books are not specially made for learning, but just made for the pleasure of reading. And this has been very successful. We have had orders from more than 50,000 copies of the book we have made specially for the schools to help them to sustain the reading of comic books in school. And we have had the support in the end of the educational minister, which was very good news, because in the beginning they were a bit questioning about it, and it's a very good tool and it's a very good thing to encourage reading of comic books in the education system in France. Let's go now to the second area, the manga. So as said, the manga has known a very good growth recently. Manga has been introduced in France in the early 90s. And from the early 90s to the mid of the years 2000, they were having a very strong growth. And then there was a kind of lowering of the activity between 2005 and 2015. And in the last 5 years, growth has come very strong again in the manga in the French market, and is now having the biggest activity it has ever had in France. Mangas are largely read by young people from 15 to 29 years, which is also good news because, as you know, or maybe not, but in France at least, we experience the fact that the young readers between 15 to 25 years old do not read as much as we would expect them. And we can see here that manga is a way to keep them into reading. And also within the manga area, 60% of the readers are women, of the buyers, sorry, and 45% of the readers are women. When people buy manga, 49% of them buy them for themselves, not to offer them, but just for themselves. And when you look at the budget spent by the young people who are 18 to 25 years old, they spend more than 100 euros in mangas to buy around 17 mangas per year. So they are very keen on spending their money on mangas. And as you know, mangas, they have a series, long series. So they publish a series of manga 4 times a year. So you need, if you want to follow 4 or 5 series, you need to buy 15 to 20 mangas per year. Last aspect of the market which I like to focus on is the graphic novel market, which has had a very strong growth also in the last years. So graphic novel for us is comics books which are mainly with more than 100 pages, and they have more free graphic approach and narrative approach. And we can especially find them into 3 categories of graphic novels: biopics, biography in pictures, contemporary fiction, often adaptation of existing novels into graphic novels, and documentary, which in some cases have reached very strong success on the French market. Today, the graphic novels are mainly bought by more than 40 years old readers. 57% of the graphic novels are bought by readers which are more than 50 years old. 52% women, 65% of people who are in the highest capacity of in economics, in revenues, sorry, and 73% of people living in urban places. 94% of the readers are more than 18 years old. And 67% of the buyers of graphic novels also have bought reading other kind of readings. So that's about the main data currently on the market, and it gives you a view of what are the main dynamics into the market currently. If you want, I can answer to question on this third part. On the second part, I will go more into who are the players on the market, which are the companies, the groups. So if you wish to have already some question on this first part, I'm ready to answer to them. I hope it is clear enough. No question?
If ever you have a question, please state your name, of course, and your country. But if you don't have question, you don't have to state anything.
Okay, I keep 10 seconds, and if there is no question, I move over.
From Hyderabad, hello. Within the manga, there are some French mangas as well, no? French authors who do manga now. You can't hear me.
Can you repeat your question, please?
Okay, I'll try with that. It's Samuel from Hyderabad in India. Can you hear me? No? One second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Wow, now the sound is too... Yeah, I was just saying that the mangas, they are all Japanese mangas. They're also French mangas because there are more and more French authors also who now, and French artists who produce mangas. So within the manga, is there some kind of breakup of that?
It is aside from 2 or 3 artists who really were able to be more powerful on the manga market. So aside from low numbers of artists, of French artists, it is still very strongly focused on the Japanese mangas.
Okay, because within the manga, there's also this kind of more graphic novel kind of a manga.
Yeah, that's true. Here in this segment, we really considered the books which are in the same type of formats than the Japanese manga. But aside from that, should it be the American comic style or the Japanese manga style, it's true that the French artists, or in general, from, I would say, French expression artists or French published artists, they are all very much influenced by what they read, and they do not read not only the classical Franco-Belgium comics historically, they read today mangas, they read today American-style comics, or sometimes, and it's true that we have a kind of mix. I mean, what is today considered into the French-Belgium market is covering a very large array of propositions and of styles. And many comics today that we put into the French-Belgium market are largely influenced by what the French artists have been reading. Yes, sorry. But when we consider the manga market typically with the typical format of manga, the place of the French artist into it is still low, aside from 2 or 3 artists which can make some nice sales.
Merci.
Okay. Any other questions, or shall I go further? Okay, I go then further, but you can still ask questions afterwards, for sure. So then, if we look at which are the players on the French market, I have tried to organize it into several categories. I have 5-6 categories to talk about. So first, you have 3 groups which are really the main players on the market, which have been developing comic books in first aspect, but they have been, for 2 of them at least, developing much more activities than comics by now, but comics is still their main activity. So the three companies, the three groups which are into this category, and together they represent 55% of the French market. You have the group number one is Média Participation, which gathers companies such as Dargaud, Le Lombard, which they bought in the 80s. And then they bought Dupuis in the beginning of the years 2000. And they also had developed in the manga with Kana and in the comics with Urban Comics recently. So it's a group which, through acquisition, has become the number one comic groups in the last 30, 40 years. And what is interesting with this group is that they have developed their activity around it, and they have developed in audiovisual. They produce animated series. They have developed in the video game. They have developed into the digital comics. They have created their own leisure park. So it's a group which has had a strong diversification around comics. And in the recent years, they have even made a bigger step, because they bought an important literature company called La Martinière Le Seuil, and they are now the number 4 publisher in France on the French market altogether, not only considering comic books. And so it's interesting to see that a group which has started mainly in the comics area, even though they had already also some other activities, has become one of the very big group in France of publishing. The second group, which has become very strong in the last 35 years, it's Delcourt. So Delcourt is a company started by Guy Delcourt, who had begun a few years before at Dargaud. And his company has especially met a very strong growth in the years 2000, as they started their own sales company to sell themselves their comic books to the bookshops. And then they bought a company called Soleil, and which enabled them to double their activity. And so today they are the number 2 publishing company into comics. They have a presence in manga, but it's a slight presence, where Media Participation has a strong presence with Kana. But they are good in comics. They have had a very strong success with Walking Dead, which has been a very powerful success in France. And it's an independent company, but they have an investment fund which entered into their company 2 years ago. The third biggest group in the French market, which has also developed mainly on comics, but has developed ever since some more activities, is Glénat, which was founded by Jacques Glénat 50 years ago, which became quickly an important player on the market, with an important growth in the 80s. And also in the 90s, when they both launched a series which became the biggest series in France at the time, called Titeuf, which has been very strong in these times. And also when they introduced the manga in France, it's Glénat really started. The manga had already existed before, but when Glénat started the manga in the beginning of the 90s, it really gave a big growth to the activity. And Glénat is still by far the number 1 on the manga market in France. They have mainly growth. They have mainly have internal growth, even though they had some acquisitions. But Glénat mainly had an internal growth in the last years. So these are the 3 main groups in the comics market in France. And so as I said, they have started mainly on comics, but they have all of them developed slightly by slightly other activities, literature or other kind of books, mainly children books also. These 3 represent more than 50% of the market. So that's the first part. Then you have 3 important players also who have strong activity in comics, but comics is not their central activities. I would start with Gallimard, who was for a long time already active in the comic activity with Futuropolis and Gallimard BD, who is the publisher of Penelope Bagieux. And Gallimard bought Flammarion, a French general group, a few years ago, almost 8 years ago now. And within Flammarion, they have had access to Casterman, which is a very old publishing company, one of the oldest in the world, and one of the main players also in France in the comics activity. So today, as we can say, Gallimard have a strong activity in comics that is mainly known, Gallimard, for his literature activity, where they are one of the biggest players in France. The second group which has invested and developed much in the comics industry recently, and especially in the children comics, is Bayard. Bayard is a French group which is strong in books and also in media, especially children and religious media. And in the last 10 years, they have had a very strong development in the children comics, especially when they have bought Edition Milan. And so they have been the publisher of today the biggest new star of comics for children, which name is Mortel Adèle. Mortel Adèle is the big phenomenon in France currently. The growth of this series is extremely impressive. And it's currently the #2 in terms of sales in France, just after Asterix, to give a good comprehension of the importance of this series, which started 7-8 years ago, but who has met a very strong growth in the last years. And then the third player, which is not mainly based on comics, but is still active in comics, is Panini, which you probably know in some of the countries. And Panini is particularly active into the American comics, imported comic books. And they especially have the Marvel license. And as you know, Marvel has been very active into movies in the last years, which has sustained seriously the activity of Panini's in France. They used to also have the license of DC Comics, but the license was taken by Urban Comics 5-6 years ago, which is part of Media Participation. So these three groups, Gallimard, Bayard, and Panini, they represent around 15% of the market. Then you have three independent groups, which are Bamboo, Kiun, and my own group, Steinkis group. Bamboo is the biggest of the three. It has been created in the 90s, and it is especially important in terms of children and humoristic comics. They recently also developed into the fantasy and the science fiction comics with imprint Draco. And they made their first acquisitions a few years ago with Fruit Glacial, which is a magazine very well known in comics. The second important independent is Kiun, which is mainly active in the manga activity and has been the biggest growing company in the manga market in the last 5 years. It has even been awarded House of the Year in last year. All categories, not only in comics or manga, so all categories in France, it has been awarded the Best Publishing House of the Year award. And so my own company, Steinkis Group, which has several imprints, Jungle for children and humoristic comics, Steinkis for graphic novels, and children books with Splash. So these three players all together, they represent around 12% of the market. And then you still have three other categories. As you may have heard, I haven't not mentioned until now the two biggest French publishing companies, all in all. So as you know, probably the two biggest group in the publishing activity in France are Hachette and Editis. And Hachette, they have developed into the comics with two important acquisitions. In 2007, they bought Pika, which is one of the main actors of the manga in France. And in 2011, they bought Albert René. They were already, they had some shares into the company, but they became the main owner in 2011. And Albert René is the host of Astérix, which is still the #1 sales of comics in France. Each new comics from Astérix is sold more than 1.5 million copies only in France. No other comics reach such sales in France. The biggest sales in France, aside from Astérix, they reach around 400,000 copies, such as L'Arabe du Futur, you may have heard also of, from Riyad Satouf. I will tell about it later. So Hachette mainly entered the market through these two activities, and Editis have created in-house activity in manga with Kurokawa, which is also one of the biggest growth in the manga activity in the recent years. And last year, Editis made an alliance with one of my own imprint, Jungle, and we are launching in the future months the first comics activities for Editis together with Jungle Associated. And so there will be a press conference on Thursday about it. And then you have several companies which are publishing house, either general publishing house or children publishing house, who have been developing in the last recent years their own comics activities. You have, for instance, L'École des Loisirs, which is an important player in France for children books, who have created their branch Rue de Sèvres, which is led by Louis Delas, who was formerly the managing director for Casterman, and which is developing a very nice qualitative offer with famous artists like Loisel, Spar, Zep, and have children quality comics. You have Les Arènes, which is also an important player in the French publishing market, especially for documents. They do a lot of documentary, journalistic books. And so the comic books that they publish are quite largely into this area. They make some nice success too. You have Michel Lafon, who has made a good growth in the manga area when publishing mangas with people coming from the YouTube areas, which is, to answer to the previous question, one of the few cases of French created manga which has had strong success. It's called Qui et Ri. And then you have a publisher called Alary, who publishes only one artist, Riyad Satouf, but with a huge success, since L'Arabe du Futur has been a very big success in France in the last years. The biggest sales in terms of graphic novels, sold more than 400,000 copies each number. There have been already 4 or 5. And when you know that it is sold more than 20 euros per book, it means that it is very strong sales, not equivalent to Astérix, but not so far. And Riyad Satouf has 2 series, L'Arabe du Futur and Les Cahiers d'Esther. And Alary do not publish any other comic books, but with these 2 books, he has made quite an impact. So once you have considered all these companies, should know also that some other group will certainly launch themselves into the comics area soon. Albin Michel, which is one of the biggest French groups in France, General Publishing, has announced he's launching also his comic activity in the coming month, and some others might do so. So today, with all the already companies which I mentioned, you have already around 90% of the market represented. And then you have a huge number of smaller companies, but smaller in terms of size doesn't mean smaller in terms of recognition. And most of them can have very strong artists, can have very strong offer, are very well respected on the French market. I could mention some of them, such as l'Association, such as Cornelius, such as 2024, such as Six Sous Terre, ça et là. So you have a very large number of smaller companies who do not publish more than 10 to 15 books per year, but sometimes have very nice, often have very nice offers, often have a lot of awards on the festivals in Angoulême and other parts of the world. So that's, and have very nice publication. So these are companies which are smaller in terms of economic impact, but are much more important in terms of artistic impact, because most of the times the companies which are bigger take advantage time by time of the work which has been done by a smaller artistic company who create new bridges, who created new forms of comics, of graphics, who make rise some new artists, and then these artists often stay with them for some publication and sign with other companies for other publications. So most of the current main artists on the French market started with the more artistic independent comic publisher. I have, I'm sure it is, I wanted to be, it's a bit schematic, of course, we could be more detailed about much of what I just said, but as time is reduced, I wanted to give you, I hope it was helpful, a view of what are also the French publishers. Maybe some of you know almost a lot of it. And sorry if I didn't bring you more, but for others, I hope it was helpful. So if you have questions, if you want to go more into some aspects, I'm at your disposal.
Augusto, Germany.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned that 57 of the buyers of graphic novels in France are older than 40 years old, and I got a little surprised. I thought that actually the readers of graphic novels were mostly much younger people. Do you have an explanation for that?
In fact, the younger people are much dedicated to children. I mean, you want to say the one which are between 20 and 40?
Yeah, that is, I mean.
Okay. Well, you know, graphic novels is quite expensive. It's mostly books which are 20, 25 euros, sometimes even more. So it doesn't mean that they don't buy graphic novels, but probably they cannot afford to buy as much graphic novels are people who are elder and are more economic ability to buy them. Also, you might imagine, you know, we have a very strong libraries system in France, bibliothèque, and you can find a lot of comics and graphic novels also in libraries. So you might imagine that also a lot of them can be read through the library system. I wouldn't say that for the digital comics. I didn't talk about it yet, but the digital comics, well, it just met a quite strong activity in the last 2 months, for sure. It was in growth, but before the virus, the digital comics doesn't weigh more than 1% of our activities, because people are very much fond of the books. We publishers invest a lot in the quality of the fabrication, in the objects, and people are still very keen on reading the books on paper rather than on digital. It might change. The last 3 months showed that there could be some growth to be gained on the digital comics, especially for the children who were very little number to read digital comics, but it seems that the recent period has offered new possibilities. We will see if it makes a bigger growth or if it still stays low. But so to answer to your question, I think it's mainly a capacity of acquisition And it's true that people who are more than 40 years old have more ability to buy a lot of graphic novels.
Just a question. I got surprised because I come from Brazil. Actually, I live in Germany, but I come from Brazil, and I think that both
You come from where?
Brazil.
Brazil. Okay.
Yeah, and both in Brazil and in Germany, we wouldn't expect that the biggest readers, the greatest readers of graphic novels are older than 40. I don't expect in Brazil people older than 40 reading comics, even graphic novels. That's why I got surprised.
But you know, because this is related to the historic of comics in France. Comics has been developed in France for more than 1 century. And especially, you have a lot of readers who started reading comics in the 80s, in the 90s, and who are now 40 years old. So all the people who started then, they continue to read books. And as far as they were important readers of children's books and then mangas, and now they evolved and they want to read books with bigger paginations, with themes which are more sociological, political themes, scientifical themes. What is good with graphic novels is that it offers important times of reading. You can read a graphic novel for several hours, rather the usual traditional comics at 48 pages in half an hour you have finished it. So for people who are more than 40 years old, they have been used to read comics since they were a child, and it's normal that they find in the graphic novel a new evolution for them.
Thank you.
I would have a question. Hello, do you hear
me? Yeah, we do.
Yes.
So you are Lucas from Poland, right?
That's right. I'm Lucas from Poland. I hope you hear me the right way. I just wanted to ask you, you've talked a lot about French publishing houses. Could you say something maybe about other French-speaking countries, just like, of course, Belgium is very present on the French market, but Canada maybe or Switzerland? Could you say something about this? Because they obviously in other countries more represented than maybe in France. I don't know. So,
so about the, I already told about the Belgian companies, because as I said, it's French expression companies, but companies like Le Lombard, like Dupuis, like Casterman were created first in Belgium, and they are still at their center activity. And these companies today are have most of their activities in France, even though they were usually founded in Belgium. I know there are some companies coming from Switzerland, like Paquet, which is part of the smaller players of the market. You have also some independent companies. And then you have a good amount of Canadian companies, which are more in the independent part of the activity, in the publishing activity. So you have some of them which are, but they are part of independent, very artistic, few publications, some of them being important also in terms of artistic offer, for sure. Names like La Pastèque, Mécanique Générale are some of the Canadian publishing houses which are part of this.
Sorry, again, me. Apart from Asterix and Obelix, what are the other graphic novels or comics, French, in French language, which are read abroad, which are the most popular abroad?
Could you speak again?
Yeah, apart from Asterix and Obelix, what are the other comics or graphic novels in French language which are popular abroad, and particularly the recent ones?
So we have seen several phenomena recently. The French publishers have organized themselves into an organization called French Comics Association, which role is to promote comics in foreign countries, and especially to start with in the United States. It's true that in the US, French publishers have been selling quite a good amount of comics in the last years. especially in the children area, because as you probably maybe know, US publisher has not been until recently very strong in the USA. Some publishers have not developed very interesting things. Some American publishers have been developing very interesting things since 5-6 years, like First, Second, and some others. But so a good amount of American publishers have been interested in buying children comics. I'm not sure whether they had such big success with these children comics in the US. French graphic novels have been also a lot bought in the recent years in the USA, and it has been interesting to see when some important of them have been awarded awards at the Eisner Awards or at the some other important Harvey Awards. So it's more, I would say, recognition that big sales in the US from what I know. But I know that some books have been sold in a very good amount of countries. For instance, like L'Arabe du Futur has been sold in more than 15 countries, as far as I know. Well, but maybe the people around here in all the countries can tell more about it, because you know probably better than me what is sold, what are the French comics which are well sold in your own countries.
And sorry, the comics and graphic novels are also sold during the Frankfurt Book Fair every year, or is there a special fair to sell the copyrights of comics and graphic novels worldwide?
Sure, we have two important times for selling, even three, I would say. Frankfurt is one of them. We can meet a lot of American publishers, in particular during Frankfurt, but also Spanish publishers, Italian publishers, German publishers for sure. So these are the main countries which we meet when we are in Frankfurt, Italian publishers also. And then we have Angoulême, which has a rights center, which is developing strongly in the last years, and which has also included audiovisual rights. Last year, we received people from Netflix and some other important producers, not only French, but international. So Angoulême is playing a more and more important part in the selling of rights. And also Bologne is an important fair for us, for children comic books in particular. So these are the three important times for us. And as I mentioned, the French Comic Association is developing activity in the US. So the New York Book Fair has been a new place for French publishers to sell rights also.
Merci.
I know that when, aside from Asterix and Obelix, I know that in Germany there is some other comics, which French comics, French-Belgian comics, which works very well. For instance, in Germany, you have Yakari, a small Indian boy, which is very popular in Germany. From Belgium, you have the Schtroumpfs, the Slumpf. I don't know how to pronounce it in every country, but which have been extremely popular through TV and cinema also. Et oui, je vois que Lucas a indiqué évidemment Torgal, évidemment, en Pologne. Voilà, je ne sais pas si vous avez d'autres questions, d'autres points sur le marché, sur les acteurs.
I just have one question, if I may. You mentioned
who is speaking?
I'm Didier, Paris, France, Institut Français. I don't know if you hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. You mentioned digital publishing. could you just mention the platforms and maybe in few words the strategy or the strategies for French publishers?
Mm-hmm. The main platform currently existing is isneo.com, which has been initiated by Media Participation, and Media Participation offered all the other French publishers to join the platform. So most of them did it, not all, but most of them. And it is today by far the biggest platform for digital comics. And it started with just offering digital adaptation of the comic books in a very systematic approach. And recently, we developed more also mangas. French publishers started to get the digital rights to mangas some years ago, not far ago. And also webtoons, the Korean style webtoon is now developing. Several players are working on it. Like for instance, Dessine, which is one of the main players in France for webtoon, and gathers a lot of free subscribers who have to pay when they want to get more of webtoon. So you have these models who are developing right now. Isneo is offering a very important number of titles, of digital titles. But as I mentioned before, it was very low for children comics. So we will see in the future if this is going to be more important.
You mentioned the association and what you've done on the US market. What is the relationship between French publisher and Comixology?
I know some of them work with them, but I don't know how much it is. I don't know. I don't have much information about them. I don't work myself with them, and I know that a few publishers still work with them, but it's not the majority. Okay.
Because Comixology, if I remember well, is part of Amazon now, right?
Yeah.
So it's part of the system. Okay.
It didn't reach an important place like it did in the US, in France.
Okay. Any other questions, remarks, answers, things to share about your country?
Something I could add is that the French market is very much centered on the books. In the past, in the 70s, in the 80s, press would play an important role. There were few books published at that time, around 500 books per year. Today, we're around 5,000 books, comic books per year. 5 comic books per year could seem important, but if you compare to literature or children comics, it's still far lower. Children comics and literature, there are more than 10,000 books published each year. So there has been some debate in France about is there too many books, too many comic books in France or not. Well, these debates date for more than 100 years. And so at the time, you can have several views about it. My view is that we have a lot of diversity, and I think we can really be happy about it. If you take the 5,000 books which are published each year, you have already 30% of them which are mangas, and then around 10% which are American comics. So the part of non-comics or non-manga imported books is 60%, so around 3,000 comic books. And it's also because we don't have the same strength as before in the press. In the past, comic books could be published only through the press. No, it is not possible. You have only one or two, I would say maybe 2 or 3 magazines which publish each month or each week comic books. It's not the same audience as it was 10, 20 years ago.
Sorry, one more question. Do you have a list of the French French language graphic novels or comics which are translated in different languages?
We haven't shared such a list, but it's something we could organize. It will take a bit of time to share all the data, but it's something we could try to do with the publishers who would want to take part. But on each website of the publishers, most of the times you have possibility to access to the rights list, the rights catalog, which is not always themselves complete, because as you have understood, there are a lot of publications each year. So for publishers who publish several hundreds of comics books each year, it could be difficult to share all the possibilities of the rights. But we could at least make a list of the main ones. We could try, if it's something useful for you.
Yeah, especially for English-speaking countries, like what you sold in the US, means that there is an English translation, and it would be very good to share this existing translations.
Sure, I'd be happy to hear about any ideas, this one and any other ideas of what you would need, what would help you. I'd be happy to hear about it and to make the best to respond to your request.
So if you don't want to make your request public, you can send emails, but we are very lucky to have Moise and the comic publishers are very active, and the association, which is a dedicated association for promoting and exporting comic books abroad, and mostly in difficult markets like the US, has been very active and really did things and raised money to develop programs. So I think it could be very useful for all of you to send some information to this association through Moise. What is the situation market based? What are the trends? What are your needs? What kind of tools you would need to develop the French translated comic book market? So really, don't be shy. Maybe you don't want to do it now, but it will be important at the end of the focus that we have a lot of information from you. I mean, you are on the field, so you know better. You know the authors, you know the publishers, the local publishers. You know your market, you know your audience. So for us, it will be very precious, and for the association, it will be very precious. Ok, Romain, je te laisse.
No, is there any other question, or can we just say goodbye to Moise and a big thank you? And we all meet this afternoon. The focus group, if I remember well, it's at 2 to present yourself. And the training group will meet again this afternoon on the question of the comics and residencies. It's going to be in French only for the training group.
Yeah, for the focus, so for the professionals, it will be 2 o'clock with Mathieu, and 3:30 with Pierre Lungheretti, the head of Syndicat National de la BD et de l'Image. But we will all meet at 2 o'clock to have a discussion.
But thank you very much, and big thank you to Moise.
Thank
you very much, Moise.
Invitation. Thank you very much.
Just another thing, this meeting has been recorded, so we'll share it on the platform, and you can use it later. Goodbye, see you this afternoon.
Merci. Merci.
Merci Moise.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you.